Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series with your host, David Rich and Calvin Tomasco. Calvin, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah, exactly. I'll show you the post I sent about Columbus, and I'm Italian. Well, I'll tell you all about it later. Yeah, screw him. Anyway, we have on tonight, we've become full circle. The very first guest of our show, so it turns out 5 months ago-ish, Dr. Peter Schwartzman, who at the time of being the first guest was just, I can't remember, did you had just won? You just won, right? You just won, right?
Yep.
The mayorship of Galesburg, Illinois, and we talked about that. And he's a member of the Green Party, and we found out that evening that he had a PhD in environmental studies. And I was like, "Ooh, this is a Green Party show. We need to talk about climate change." So we have him back on 5 months later to talk about climate change mostly. But why don't we go ahead and why don't you give us a couple minutes summary on what's been going on in Galesburg?
Well, I've been in office now for a little over 5 months. And, what's exciting about it, we have 4 new counselors. So the city of Galesburg has 7 counselors and 4 of them are new. And that's 2 of those people were nominated by me and then approved by the rest of the council. And we have a much more deliberative body than we've had in the past. I think people in the community are realizing now that they have members of the council who are listening to them, who understand maybe the plight and challenges we all face. And that's turned generally what was previously stale and kind of doldrum type of official meetings into something that I think people are looking forward to. They want to hear what's going on. They listen in. We broadcast those on local TV. We can stream those meetings as well. So that's been exciting. And we're going to be working on some strategic planning over the next month or so, which is something I've been looking to do for years. And we're finally going to get that accomplished. And that's really the heart and soul, right, of a community is what are we going to do and let's make it happen, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's one thing, I'm very community oriented. I want to hear what the dreams and ambitions are of my community. And that's why I was elected. That was the point. It wasn't for me to come in as like this stern mayor who knows everything. Not at all. I feel like I have something to contribute, but I want to listen. I want to translate the dreams and ambitions into something that we all can enjoy, right? The whole community has to be lifted. We can not only serve, it does no good to serve just a few interest groups. That does no good for us in the short term or the long term. And I think that's kind of an emancipation of the people of Galesburg is what I hope to accomplish. I see myself as a catalyst to that. And I think the other councilors that are new really see that opportunity as well. Very exciting stuff.
Well, if you could get that sentiment over to the federal level, that'd be great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. That's fantastic.
I wanted to ask real quick, a follow-up from last one is you mentioned the streetcar maybe coming back. Has there been any positive headway in that regard?
Well, it's been mentioned by other people than me. So that's a good start.
Yeah, that's a start. Yeah.
Transportation is really an important area, public transportation. And even in the county, we don't really have any bus service to the county. And I think that's definitely, I feel like an obligation at this point for our community to provide that. We have a lot of services in Galesburg that are needed from community members. And if we don't provide that service, we're just expecting people to walk, during ice storms and whatnot, or pay extreme amounts of their limited salaries to go to cars and insurance and all the other things that private vehicles require, and gas on top of which. So, to me, if we really want Galesburg to be the hub of our county, we need to be providing public transportation. And so that's something that in 2022, I feel is going to happen. And I'm excited to see that happen. But yeah, a streetcar would be fabulous as the community, as some people may know. We had a prosperous streetcar in Galesburg in the 1920s, and we were the first city in the United States that was targeted to get it removed. And they were very successful in that. And so there's almost no memory of that physically in our community. I'm sure there are some lines that we have to dig up, and maybe that'll be part of like our hunting for our history, which I'm hoping
that'd be cool.
encourage as well.
A lot of history there in Galesburg, a lot. Okay, so speaking of climate change, why don't we go ahead, and I'd like to start with, why don't you tell us in your expertise, what is it exactly? I mean, climate change obviously is, I'd just like to start from scratch. Climate change is a huge topic. Why?
Well, let me just be clear. My PhD is in atmospheric science, and I focus specifically on climate change. So environmental studies, environmental science is a very broad field.
Gotcha.
And I don't say that to claim I'm the expert, but I think it's important to know a little bit about the background. I also point out that my advisor during my PhD period was and still is one of the most well-known climate cynics of our time. And that comes as a surprise probably to you two, as well as most people who meet me, because I'm clearly not a climate cynic at all. He had an influence on me, and in terms of understanding what the debate was about and what the real, scientific uncertainty was about. There is a lot of scientific uncertainty in a lot of areas, but what do we know? And what we know is that when we put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and when I'm talking about CO2, carbon dioxide is primary, methane, CH4 is another major one. And then CFCs, and we have these things called HCFCs we can talk a little bit about, because they're a really big, they were supposed to be a solution and now they're a part of the problem. But those are the greenhouse gases. We put those gases in the atmosphere, and what they do is that they absorb the light that the earth emits. So we talk about sunlight. Most people don't realize we have earth light, and earth light is emitted from the earth all the time, 24/7. It doesn't go out like the sunlight. And it emits 24/7. And what happens to that light? Well, it can either be absorbed by the atmosphere, which keeps the heat in, because light is transferred into heat, or it goes out of the atmosphere and it cools the earth. Well, if you look at the clock in 1750, a certain amount of light, of that earth light, was getting out to space and cooling the earth. Well, now we have more gases in the atmosphere absorbing that light, because they're in higher concentration, and they're re-radiating that light back to the surface. That's the greenhouse effect. And let me just really emphasize, and this is really important, and so important to the conversation. If you were to look at the atmosphere as like little balls, that you could physically see, right? The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is literally such a small amount. It's less than 1%. It's less than 0.1%. We actually measure it in parts per million. So out of a million balls in the atmosphere, only about 400 of them are CO2. So you'd literally, if you were like jumping into a pool of balls, you'd have to search to find any balls that were CO2. But what's so incredible about this gas is it doesn't take much to warm the earth. So before human industrialization, these balls of CO2, and I should say water vapor, is the primary greenhouse gas. We don't talk about it, but CO2 and water vapor primarily were warming the earth by about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the natural greenhouse effect. But when you add a little bit more CO2, when I'm talking about a little bit more, we're going from about 280 parts per million to about 400 where we are now, okay? That increase is at least up to now increased the temperature by about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And that 1.5 degree is now warming us to the point where we haven't seen levels above that for the last several million years on Earth. And that predates the human species, not to think of human civilization. So we're at that high end. And any further tweak, any further increase of greenhouse gas is going to put us above that higher limit that we've seen on Earth. And it's not just that we're above that limit, but that we're doing it so quickly. Historically, temperatures have increased over time, but they usually do it over thousands of years or tens of thousands of years. We're talking about increasing the temperature substantially over 100 years. And that's why, we should be concerned. And it's not just, people think, well, yeah, I could deal with an extra degree or 2 or even 5. You know what? You turn the air conditioner on. You get your rag they put around your neck to cool you off. I mean, But that's not how the system works, folks. That's the problem, right? The trees don't have air conditioning, right? The insects don't have air conditioning systems. They function on timetables. And so when the trees move, and we actually see trees moving in Siberia. I know Shakespeare talks about the trees moving. Well, they are moving in Siberia, and they're moving very quickly. Okay, it's almost like they have legs. And when we do take satellite photographs of Siberia, we see the trees moving, and they're moving on decadal levels. Okay, and that's only because we started looking. We only started looking at this recently. So trees are moving. So what happens to the insects? What happens to lots of other things? We're changing the system. It's hard for humans to believe this. Okay, it's just hard because we think we're this little species. We're one of many. COVID, this invisible species, is causing this mass destruction of humans. What can humans do? Well, I'm here to tell you that humans can do a lot. And we can do a lot of harm, or we can do a lot of good. It really depends on what kind of culture and society we want to build.
I wanted to clarify in there, when you say trees are moving, do you mean like forest tree lines because the next generation of trees are only growing in one direction? Okay, exactly. So not individual trees.
Not literally. Don't take me literally like
uprooting and
yeah, the Ents from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I know it's true. Sometimes science fiction takes over people's reality of what a tree can do.
Yeah.
A tree is not physically moving, but literally the tree line is shifting quickly. Yeah. And that's just one indication that we have. We're changing the system. We see most of our ice caps are gone. Okay. And or will be literally demolished. Mount Kilimanjaro, right, has this massive ice cap, and it's mostly disappeared. And given current trends, it will be gone within the next decade or so. And it's not just these physical manifestations. When we count insects, which we don't normally do, it's not something most of us sit around thinking of doing. We're finding tremendous declines in certain areas of our world. And people say, well, I don't like insects anyway, so screw them, get rid of them. Well, unfortunately, we depend on insects. Guess who pollinates most of our food? Insects do, right? So think that, we talk about hugging trees, kiss your bee, right? Let's do other things, right? Let's take on different manifestations of loving nature. We have to love nature. If we decide that we're going to live outside of nature, then we're done, because nature will take care of us.
Right.
True.
Yeah, I mean that's a hard lesson to learn, and it's going to be real hard for a lot of people real soon. Is like, yeah, nature is going to win. I don't know why people have this idea that they can just do whatever they want to a landscape or to nature or to an ecosystem with no consequences at all. It's really stupid.
Well, the reason why it's hard, we can get into it, but the reason why it's hard is because people think that we have to defeat nature in order to survive. And it's actually the opposite. Okay. We have to learn how to live with nature in order to survive.
That's exactly right. I don't see how you can even think of it any other way. That doesn't make it. What do you mean you have to fight against nature to survive? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let's talk about. I'm sorry, Calvin. Did you have any other preliminary questions?
Yeah, a quick one about when you say organisms out in nature don't have air conditioning. They can't just create a perfect shelter and develop electricity and do that. You made me think of the coral reefs, and I wonder how much that goes along with this, and how impactful that might be for the oceanic. What are those called? Not tidal waves. The paths that the ocean take.
Oh, the ocean currents.
Currents?
Yeah, ocean currents. Thank you.
Right. So look, we've been measuring pH in ocean now, and we see that we're lowering the ocean pH. Ooh. And it only takes, we're making it more acidic. It only takes a little bit of change of the oceans are vast. So imagine changing the pH of an ocean. I mean, we're talking about just like the number, it doesn't have a name, right? The number of gallons of water in the ocean is a number bigger than we can even fathom. Okay. It's bigger than the national debt. So that tells you it's a lot, right? So we have this humongous ocean, and we've changed the pH of it appreciably. And it's starting to show up. It's having an effect on what kind of microscopic creatures can manifest. We're changing the balance of the ocean. So one of the most visible, we don't see phytoplankton unless we're under a microscope. So where we see it is in the coral reefs, and we're bleaching the coral reefs, right, by changing the local and global environments there. And that should be a warning sign, like bells and whistles. like one of the most diverse places on earth, and one of the most beautiful, by the way. I've had a chance in my life, very thankfully, to witness a coral reef, close up, and there's almost nothing more beautiful, right? I mean, you feel like it's like it's out of worldly. It's out of your body. You see these fish of all different colors swimming around, and they look at you like, "What are you?" And it's an unbelievable. And I feel kind of guilty that I did that, but it's something probably everyone should have one chance at to see, because when you see it and you realize that we're destroying it, it really just sucks at you, because we cannot do that. It is a life blood of our planet. It's a very unique thing. It doesn't exist everywhere, and it's a sign. It's a warning sign. It's like a coal miner's the bird. If we don't see that as, wake up, humans, wake up, change your ways, change them fast, you're going to lose this. And it's not just the loss of life, but it's what that provides, right? The diversity of life is what sustains life. And if the more we infect and change and modify these special places, not only are our lives diminished because we can't see them, and we can. And let me just say this: we cannot expect Disney to reproduce and recreate this on the screen, right, for future generations. We need real coral reefs that with real, genetic, natural genetics. And all the dynamism that exists between the interaction of species. We need real things. We can't let Disney profligate like what the future ecosystems look like. Because I think, unfortunately, I say that kind of jokingly, but children are seeing these reefs in Disney and they think that's real, right? They think Snuffleupagus is a real creature, and because they've never seen an elephant before. Or whatever Snuffleupagus is supposed to be. So anyway, I had to put that in there. I got to put a plug for Snuffleupagus.
Fair enough.
Well, you gotta have some fun with this, right?
Yeah. We may have lost David's feed for a little bit. There is for watchers later on, there is like a storm going on right now. There is a tornado watch in our area, so that might explain some of that.
Well, is that a warning sign? Like, come on,
Yeah, dang it.
People don't realize that things, we have a long history of weather measurements, and we can look at trends and shifts in when things occur. And there are things occurring that shouldn't occur. I was in Oklahoma last October, and there was a massive ice storm in the middle of October, and literally trees were taken out because they were not prepared. They hadn't lost their leaves yet. They were not prepared for an ice storm, and the whole place turned into looked like a war zone overnight, because the timing of that ice storm was not in keeping with previous histories. Those trees were not adapted to that environment, to that kind of like change of season, a change of weather at that time. The timing of things really matter. And we humans have gotten away from that because, we're inside our homes and air conditionings and, we just adjust to whatever it is. But yet we have to understand most humans only occupy, I think it's something like 5% of the land on Earth. So the other 95% is naturally to the extent that humans obviously change more than that, but in terms of where we live. So there are a lot of natural processes that govern what's going on. And when we change climates, it's affecting these things in serious ways.
Yeah. Before I pass it on to David leading the climate change charge, which I really love, I wanted to just highlight that we had guest Dan Tweed on before, who talked about NASA astronauts and how they received the overview effect when they got to see the globe from on high. And I think you're bringing up a new effect, which is the coral reef effect. When people see the coral reef, they recognize biodiversity and the importance of like all the different creatures on there. So I think that's really cool that you mentioned that.
Well, I love what you just said. I think that's really true. I mean, there's books about getting children outdoors, and they've done studies. The main thing in the U.S. culture that dictates whether someone's really environmentally oriented or not is how much time they've had outside, directed, just playtime, just time to explore. The ability to explore your environment is something that we've lost for whatever reason, and we have to recapture it. Schools, of course, I think if I was running a school, 1 hour a day, let the kids run out, take them to the woods, let them go to the pond, play around.
Yeah.
That's what we need, unstructured experiences in nature. And that's where we develop a love and appreciation, because whether we realize it or not, we are a species. We're a living thing. And think about our evolution. We are part of nature.
Yeah.
I mean, and the fact that we do everything we can to separate ourselves from it is our own demise.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, and there's probably all sorts of, competing explanations as to why we have that sort of attitude and disposition nowadays. Some would claim it, stewards of the earth and that kind of thing. And, when the religious sort of explanations, people like God telling Adam and Eve to name all the animals, and that somehow we have some sort of dominion over the earth, which is just stupid. But anyway, I'll pick on the Bible later. Let's talk about the IPCC then. Okay, we talked about it a little bit before the show. I believe it was 2017 or 2018 where the IPCC put out at that point a updated report on climate change, the effects, the explanations, that kind of thing. And they had given a certain amount of percentage of carbon dioxide emissions that needed to be reduced globally annually until the year 2030, and then we can hit our first deadline of success, and then to net zero by 2050. I don't recall what the exact number was, percentage. I think it was 35. Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay, well, it's irrelevant. It was lower than what it is now. The fact is that in 2017 or 2018, nobody listened to that report. Nobody heeded the advice. So then they upped it to 45% now until 2030. So now it's a greater sense of urgency. We have to do more with less time. If we had just listened in the first place, at least 4 or 5 years ago, and we didn't. So now we're at the point where 45% reduction in emissions globally. It's a global average that needs to, that's what that number means by 2030. That seems pretty bleak to me personally. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. So I'll put it in slightly different terms. Okay. So about 3-4 years ago, the report you're referring to, it estimated that we could not emit more than 500 gigatons of CO2. That was the limit. So we know how much CO2 and other gases are in the atmosphere, and we couldn't emit more than that amount, because once we exceed that amount, then we believe we have changed and altered the atmosphere to the point that it may be irreversible. Okay, and that's where we get into some really serious problems.
Right.
Now, so we can. Okay, so what is 500 gigatons of CO2? I mean, how many gallons of gasoline is that, right? So, and you could back calculate it. You could figure it out. My father and I have actually written some articles on this. You can go to solar. The best site would be probably theearthisnotforsale.org, which is where our book is located. We have some additional articles that we've written. We're trying to get one published. We're getting a lot of resistance to it for different reasons, probably political ones, frankly. But so you have 500 gigatons that you can't exceed. And you only, you have whatever the amount of time. At some point in the near future, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, you have to stop emitting CO2, right? And so you have a limit. Well, the easiest way to stop doing that, right, is put a cork in it, right? So that's how people refer to it. So we got to put a cork in the ground so we don't let any more we don't burn any more fossil fuels. Well, how can we do that when our economy is still, and not only our economy, but the world economy is about 85% fossil fuels still, even in 2021, which is kind of absurd to think about, frankly, because we've known about this. You talk about the IPCC report. Their first report came out in the 1990s, right? And their first report was actually more
conservative.
There was more hesitancy to be very declarative about it, right? That they made pronouncements, but they said, there's a wide range and uncertainty here. We don't know what aerosols are going to do. There's some things in it, but we knew back then that all lines are all signs pointed towards this state we're in. So this should not be a surprise. Okay. And I happen to be studying climate change in the mid-90s. So for me, yeah, I've been like, every day I wake up like, okay, when's humanity going to shift? When is it going to shift? Why not today? Why not tomorrow? When is it going to shift? But I started teaching environmental studies in 1998 at Knox College. When is it going to shift? And I keep asking students this question, and I've seen the shift in student perspective. A lot of students today, they're like, we're cooked. It's too late. Okay. But I'm going to end on a very hopeful note before we're done. So, but let me point out. So we are in a situation now where we have to shift away from fossil fuels. What's the best way to do that? Of course, renewable energy is the best way to do that. And as my father and I have shown, and many others, I refer to Jacobson in Stanford has a really extensive program where they've studied this and been reporting on what's called the Solutions Project. If you haven't looked at the Solutions Project, look it up. It's got a great website. It looks at things state by state and all the things that can be done. But we can produce enough renewable energy for anything humans could ever want now and in the future. There is so much sunlight and there's so much wind, and there you can use geothermal as well. There is just it's not like we're short on energy. And when I say everything, I'm talking about growing food. I'm talking about taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay, that's called sequestration. And if you have solar panels running machinery to take CO2 to the atmosphere to equilibrate it, that's what we may have to do. Okay, but there is enough solar energy to do that. It's not even, we're not even approaching anywhere close to the limit. So just give me an example. Plants on Earth, all the plants on Earth use 1% of the sunlight that comes in. Right. So imagine if humans lived on 1% of the sunlight that came in, that would be multiple times any energy use that we would ever consider necessary to run everything we do. Okay. And we obviously have extreme amounts of waste in our society.
Yeah.
So, 40% of our food that we grow is wasted. Right. So there's an example. But okay, so we have enough energy. How quickly can we shift? Well, let me tell you, we're shifting very quickly right now. People will be shocked to hear this. Since 2000, wind globally is up 19% per year. Per year.
That's good.
Solar is up 36% per year. Now, if you are an investor, like if I was sitting here talking to a bunch of investors, they'd say 36% growth over 20-year period. Why didn't I have my money in there? Money. Right. So that is being driven by money. Forbes did an article, you can look it up. Renewable energy had a 7 times greater return this past year than fossil fuels. So if you want to waste your money and just blow it on a slot machine, which is basically just taking your money, put it in fossil fuels. So guess who knows this? People with lots of money know this. So they are moving us towards a renewable energy world to make money, to make more money, and also to have even hegemony over energy. So here's the challenge. We could get all the energy we want, but who's going to own it? And how is it going to be distributed? Right? We have enough food in the world right now to feed everyone multiple times over, frankly. But we know we have hungry people in our own backyards.
Right.
Okay. Do we want energy to look the same way? If it does, guess what that's going to mean? More clashing, more fighting, more inequity, more hostility, more death, all this. So we not only need to add renewable energy into our systems, but we have to do so while we deal with equity at the same time. Okay. So back to energy. We can do this, and we can do it quickly. Now, is the 19% and the 36% per year that I just mentioned, is that going to be fast enough? It's not. It's not.
It's not fast enough.
It's not. We need about probably double that.
Okay.
And we're not even trying, in my opinion. Okay. We're letting the economics of it drive it. What if we had political will to really drive it? We could easily double our production and transition. And if we did that, we would avoid these disastrous changes. We would keep the CO2 in the ground where it probably should be, because it's fossil. We talk about fossil fuels. Why is it called fossil fuel? Because it was buried as a fossil. That's why. And it's a fossil concept, right? It's an old concept. It's an 18th century concept. So let's look at 21st century. I mean, last time I looked at the calendar, it's 21st century. Let's talk about 21st century solutions. Let's talk about 21st century morals that we recognize. Like in the 17th, 18th century, we thought if people had different skin color that they should like work for us and do all the work. Well, we know better than that now. Okay, that's an old concept. We now realize that no, we have to equilibrate our sharing belief, because we know it's better for everyone when we share. We know it's better for our society, whether it be at large or even at the local level. We are better off when we share. There's less fighting, there's less hardship, there's less trauma, there's less all the bad things we can get rid of. We sweep them right off the map. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take a lot of dedicated work. But I'll say this: it takes. I think this is the most important thing. It takes people who believe this. And as I said earlier, a lot of my students don't believe this. They think we're cooked. They think, and you even, Dave, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think earlier, just in this conversation, you said something about, no one's doing anything. Okay. And I think that's a common refrain, but the reality is that lots of people are doing a lot of things, but we just have to recognize them and put them at the forefront of this human transition. There are amazing people. Paul Hawken is a great thinker, but in communities of color all over the country, all over the world, people are fighting. Some of the best climate stuff, action stuff is happening in indigenous communities. And this is Indigenous Peoples Day. Every paper in the United States should acknowledge the incredible work that's being done on behalf of humans in those communities, despite all the hardship that they've endured over time, right? So to me, and this is hard because our media does not do this. We have drunk the Kool-Aid, and the Kool-Aid is that there is nothing good happening, that we're all at war. It's Trump versus us, and nothing's ever going to happen. That's what we've been taught. But I'm here to tell you, somehow the seeds of positivism have been laid in my mind, in my genes, in my whatever. And I see it when I go to places where you least expect to see it. You see it, and it's a beautiful thing when you see it, because you see people working together towards a common good. And despite the tremendous historical and current cynicism that exists, they are defying the odds, right? They are working towards positive change. And they know what's good about renewable energy. It creates lots of jobs. That's what it does. It cleans up our streams. It cleans up our lakes. It cleans up our air. Some people say they don't like what solar panels look like or what wind turbines look like. I said, well, okay. It's an aesthetic thing. I mean, I don't know. Get over it. I mean, I don't know. Aesthetics should not. We want a healthy environment. That should be more important than some maybe nuanced aesthetic that people have.
And then if they don't want to put solar panels on their roofs, then they can donate money to the solar captures out in the desert, where they heat up molten salt with parabolic lenses and aim it at a big tower. And right. you can, I mean, it's the desert and most people aren't trying to use that space. So use it to harness sun. Donate your money to that. If you don't want to put panels on your roof, you can still contribute and still have your aesthetic perfect home and how you want your roof to look, I guess. But don't use that as an excuse to not participate. Oh, right.
But here's the other thing. Like I said, we're not even trying. Honestly, if we wanted to make solar panels look pretty, we could do that. Put our artists to work, right? Incentivize it. Wind turbines, they don't have to be white. They could have art. They could be designed. They could turn into beautiful objects. We haven't tried. We haven't tried it all. Okay. And I do agree. Like what we have right now, I think is sufficient in terms of technologically to get us out of this total rut. But it is only the scratching the surface of what's possible. There in the research mode, there's research about recreating leaves, the concept of artificial leaves. Plants are doing this absorption of CO2, and they create energy and food for us. We know we do it. We eat it every day. Okay. Right. So if we could figure out ways to recreate that, and it's called biomimicry is the concept, right? We're mimicking nature. If we could learn how to do that, and there are cells in solar cells that have been recreated with that model, and they don't have the efficiency of the ones that are on your roof at this point, but they're getting there. And if we tried a little bit harder as a society, if we mandated, we found, right, a vaccine, multiple vaccines all throughout the world in 6 months. If we put that kind of energy into some of these other areas, we could make our solar panels look pretty. You wouldn't even notice they were there. They'd be like paint on your house. Okay. Right. People would like, whatever paint color you want. You paint your house and it's getting solar energy while you paint it. The wind turbines too. I mean, I think we're just touching the surface, and I'm not here to, there's so many people just reject change, and I'm about, no, let's look at what we need to transition. This is a transition, and it's going to put us all in a better place. It's going to make us all healthier. It's going to make us all more like invigorated, not only because we are part of the change. I think this is another thing. I hope people, if I can plant a seed, like being alive today is an amazing time. Imagine the people who were alive when slavery ended, right? They put their lives in creation of non-slavery environments. Now that took many years, decades, right? And just because we didn't have slavery didn't mean we had tremendous oppression of Black people in this country. But here's a case where our society can transition to a cleaner environment. When you take out a coal plant and you put in solar panels, you have demonstrably improved the environment immediately, right? Immediately. And that makes it distinct from slavery. And as I mentioned earlier, while we're doing the transition to solar panels, we have to acknowledge the way solar panels are made right now. Guess who's enduring that? People in China. Right? People who are excavating silicon.
In the global south, yeah.
Right? So there are still people who are being sacrificed for this transition. It doesn't have to be that way, right? But we have to acknowledge that, and we have to own that. And so as we ramp up a bigger solar fields around the country, and I'll just give you an example, just south of my community, there is anticipated to be a panel, about 400 acre lot that's going to be solar array. Nice. That's going to provide more electricity than everyone in my city could use. And this is going to happen throughout the United States. It's being ramped up in Illinois because we have a relatively progressive governor right now who recognizes the imperative. And he's, I mean, I don't want to talk about all his other policies, but on this issue, he's making things happen. He's pushing things forward, and Governor Quinn before him set the stage for this. So I have to give credit to Governor Quinn as well. But I would also point out this has to happen at the local level, and I want to get to that at some point tonight. We have to think of global, but we really can make our impact. Most of us individually can make our impact at the local level, and we should never ignore that power that we have.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question on that, if I may. So, and I'm glad we got you on a second time, so I get to ask you about my favorite topics. But I'm curious if you think, with most of the populace, I think most of the populace either being like okay with working on climate change or gung ho about working towards fixing climate change, do you feel that ranked choice voting can help at the local level break through kind of these corporate-backed candidates and get more and more people elected to office that represent that concern for climate change? Do you think ranked choice voting is like a big help for our fight with climate change?
No, I think it is. Where I've seen it employed, I think it can make a difference. I think it can't. It's not the only panacea, right? We got to get the money out of the institutions that run these elections. I mean, even to run for state office right now, it costs several $100,000. That's ridiculous. I mean, if you're not, I mean, it's no surprise that a lot of governors in the United States are billionaires. It's no surprise, right? And that just can't be. I mean, that's not a sustainable way of governance, and that's why local is also very important. But no, I mean, ranked choice voting is a great step in the right direction, but I think it in of itself is not going to be sufficient, because media, access to media is critically important. If you get a certain number of signatures, and therefore you have support by your community, you should be given equal airtime in every media form that's available. If not, then that's not democracy. And do we live in a democracy or do we not? I mean,
in theory, yes. In practice, no. Yeah, no. The 99% of the people who don't believe in climate change or think it's a hoax, whatever, are Republicans. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of the Republican Party in one fell swoop. Just get rid of them. The Libertarians can take the place; they're a lot more reasonable. And then the Green Party can, of course, take the Democrats' place.
Well, some Republicans voted for me, so I'm not against all of them.
No,
I would
not
say
all of them. I'll bet you that the vast majority of people who think that climate change is not true, I bet you they're Republicans. I would wager.
It may be, but
most of them.
But I want to problematize that.
Okay.
We just quickly, what I found in my campaign is when I walk up to someone's door, I don't care what flag you raise, what color you are, what color your political card is. I met you as a human being, and I want to hear what you have to say. And too often we get wrapped up in all these national movements, and that's all they are. I mean, they're literally get behind the flag and support every nonsense that either party is championing at the moment. I mean, we had an insurrection, but yet it's not apparently right. We there's all this other stuff that I could say, and frankly, the Democratic Party has been in power. I know you're not defending them either, but the Democratic Party has been in power at times over the last 30 years, and they've given mostly just hand waving to this critical issue, among others. Equity in the United States has gotten worse, right? More inequality over the last 40, 50 years during my lifetime, during our lifetimes, right? More inequality, despite the right to vote that was finally granted to African Americans, despite all these other, we had mass incarceration during the last 50 years, which has taken the vote away. So, we can pick on parties. I tend to think human beings should see themselves as autonomous relative to parties, and they should focus on the kinds of change that they can make. And if they, I think mainstream parties are often don't have their best interests, and they have to accept that. So where can they make an impact? At the local level, right? They know the people that are in office, and they can push for. Here's an example. There is no reason why every city in the United States should not be 100% solar within a year. There's no reason. It's economically irresponsible. Let me repeat that. It's economically irresponsible for any community in the United States to not be 100% solar in the next year. Guess why? Because every community in the United States can have 100% solar with no money down. Right? There are solar companies that will come in, put up solar panels wherever you allow them, and they'll charge you less than you're paying for electricity right now. Wow. So how is it possible that this is not happening everywhere immediately? I don't think
anybody knows that.
Right. Well, it's happening though. I mean, it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. But
was that in the last bill that passed? Was it CEJA? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, CEJA bill in Illinois it incentivizes it. So big companies are going to come to Illinois rather than go elsewhere because they can make more money. Again, it's mostly a monetary thing, but realistically speaking, solar is cheaper than wind. I mean, than coal, than gas, than other forms of electricity production. So therefore, it's basic economics.
Yeah.
Another thing. Especially in Illinois, we have some of the best soil in the world. Why are we importing our food from California? Almost
so
all of our
stupid.
vegetables, non-corn and soy, are coming from California. That doesn't make any sense. It's in Illinois' interest, the people of Illinois, to grow their own food and actually be an exporter of food. We should be the breadbasket of the United States, not California. California, of course, was a desert. Okay, right? The Cadillac Desert. You ever read that book? Okay, it's a great book. California became the state that produced all the food because they stole water from everyone else. Okay, that's what they did. Okay, they redirected rivers and they stole water. Well, guess what? 100 years later, they're losing their water because they're still a desert, and their water is not being recharged because of climate change. So if we rely on vegetables to be grown in California, we're all going to starve. I mean, I'm not joking about that, right? It's a severe issue here. And Illinois is perfectly situated to be growing the food that the nation needs now and in the future. Last thing I'll say, when I said back about solar panels and energy, we can use solar panels to run farming indoors. Okay.
Oh yeah.
It's just, and we can do that year round.
Yep.
And so we can have nutritious food year round anywhere in the United States. As long as the sun comes out, guess what? We got food on the table. And, guess when the sun's going to burn out? We've got at least 1 billion years before it becomes a problem. So I'm here telling you that if we want to get on the 1 billion year plan, adopt the sun as our energy source, right? If we want to be on the 20-year plan of collapsing humanity, let's continue to burn fossil fuels, because that's where we're headed.
I've got my last question on local. I think it's local, but it might expand more. We look at the largest greenhouse gas contributors, and most of them are either the U.S. military or large corporations. And these large corporations are ran by probably a board of directors, and their interest is primarily profit. Some of them might be conscious, but I don't think most of them are, about climate change and adding to the greenhouse effect. So that brings me to, should we at the local level be spurring on more worker cooperatives where the workers are the co-owners and directors of the enterprise? They are their own board of directors. Because we've come across guests before. We had guests come on about stop ETOs at Lake County, and these cleaning companies were emitting a known carcinogen or cancer-causing element out there. And I asked them, do you think if there was a unionized workforce or if this company was a worker cooperative, that they would agree to be essentially ruining their own communities and putting a toxic chemical for their families and their loved ones and their neighbors to be infected by? And of course, the guest said no. And that got me thinking, wait, most of our enterprises should be worker cooperatives, because the people should be making the decisions, because the people are the ones that live in these environments. I imagine these shareholders at these large corporations just are in this belief that they'll always be rich enough to outrun nature and leave the rest of us to squalor and to receding landlines, water rising temperatures and acidity, and the turmoil that comes from that, and the large mass movement of people that will come from that as well. Just what do you think about pushing for worker cooperatives at the local level and hoping that it eventually leads to better enterprises out there? I know they're still capitalistic, but they'd be better, I think.
Oh, I completely agree with you. Absolutely. I mean, there is so much, when we talk, we're the wealthiest country in the world, but why do we have so much hunger, right? Why are so many people behind bars? Why do kids not have books? Like, we have college students today who can't afford books. How does that make any sense? Doesn't make any sense, right? So it's because the wealth is not properly shared, right? And when you create a workers' cooperative, by virtue of how it's organized, it's guaranteed, right, in the bylaws, that there's only so much difference that can in salary that can occur from the top to the bottom. There is no limit right now in most corporations, right? And if you look at that number, like the highest paid worker, CEO to the lowest paid worker, that ratio just keeps getting larger and larger and larger. I mean, when I was growing up, my grandfather used to tell me these numbers, and those were absurd back then, and now they're like 100 times worse. It's like, is there no limit to that? So frankly, yes, when workers own their work and they own the decision processes, and that could be any kind of work we're talking about. It actually provides them what I would say, it allows them to self-actualize because they have controlling interests. They can decide when to shift, how to make. Their creativity really becomes manifest in their work. They love their work. I mean, how many people love their work these days? Right. So many people just feel like they're just working for the man, as it were, right? Yeah. They go to work because they have to pay the bills, but they rather do 100 million things other than that. We wonder why people aren't going back to work. We're talking about, COVID. People are like, screw it. I found a way to survive at home without working. Why do I want to work for the man? So in that discussion is, what if we had productive work? Most of us who work a few of us who work in areas where we really do love our work and we have autonomy and we have control. We want to work. We love to work. In some ways, we can't even stop working, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, I completely agree. The other point, and I want to push this book.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. And I'll share the link for the book, but I wanted to highlight and make sure, do you think that worker cooperatives would lead to a better effect in climate change specifically?
Well, sure. I think one, you'd have more wealth local, and then people would be more inclined to want to protect their environments. And that would lead them towards, like I said, better economies of use of solar energy. That's the savings right there. They'd be looking at their heating bill. There's a whole bunch of other factors, like to create local environments that are beautiful. That's where I think I haven't been able to explain. Going solar doesn't just mean putting solar panels up everywhere, right? I mean, or wind turbines. It's really a recognition that we can change our relationship to the environment in ways that are much more in keeping with nature. So we don't have to pollute everything. So that's going to allow nature to be resilient and respond in positive ways and basically come back, as it were. But in speaking to worker cooperatives explicitly, when you have workers who I would think would get together and say, look, we recognize the science. We know our workers need time in nature. So 1 hour a week, 1 hour, 2 hours a week, we're going to basically let people go wander off and do fun stuff in nature. And that's going to increase productivity. See, this is the falsehood of productivity and the management systems of, like the assembly line kind of concept. It completely removed nature from the landscape. I mean, both figuratively and literally. And we need to reintegrate that into the way we do things. And I think the more local level control of these cooperatives, they know who's buying their product. They more in tune with the product themselves and the control over what it looks like, how it's promoted. The better things will be. But I do want to mention this book. It's called Local Dollars, Local Cents. Okay. And this is really putting emphasis on, spending our money locally to invest. And we have so much wealth in the United States, particularly, but yet we just send it away. It just drifts away in big box stores. Our food's not grown locally, so all the money we spend on food just goes away, and that's by design, right? There are people out there collecting those monies. I'll give you another idea of the wealth in Galesburg, a city of 30,000 people, right? This summer, in 1 month, $3.6 million were put in slot machines. $3.6 million. That's $100 per person, more than $100 per person. And we're not a rich community. So what is that a sign of? Right? That's a sign of a lot of things. It's a sign of vice. It's a sign of cynicism. It's a sign of failure to provide fun activities for people. But it isn't a sign of it's a sign that there's a lot of wealth, right? There's a lot of wealth in our community. And so if that money were redirected in directions that we know we need, like mental health care, activities for children, arts and entertainment for the masses, right? Public transportation, improved downtown ecosystems, new enterprises in urban agriculture. That 3.6 million, that in 1 month, that would be enough to carry probably all of those things combined for an entire year. but it's a question of investment. It's a question of prioritization. And so I'm here to try to stimulate people to think in those terms and really make a difference.
Yeah, and I wanted to throw up that that link that you mentioned earlier about the book you and was it your father were working on?
Yeah, this is my dad and my book. And the subtitle is very important. I don't know if you can see it. It's a path out of fossil capitalism to the other world that is still possible. That's the subtitle.
Nice.
And that's the point. You know, there's so much despair and cynicism right now. And I'm like, no, come on, folks, wake up, go outside, breathe the fresh air, take a lesson from a butterfly or a rainbow. I saw an amazing rainbow a couple days ago. Okay, it was the greatest, most just vivid rainbow I've ever seen, and I swear not, I didn't occur. I took a picture of it because it was the first rainbow I've ever seen hit the ground. So you know what they say? What's at the end of a rainbow?
Pot of gold.
Yes. Well, guess what? I'll show you the picture so that you have documentation of this. Hopefully, I can pull it up.
I saw the end of a rainbow once.
Okay. What was at the end of it?
A field.
Okay. Well, look.
I mean, mythically and metaphorically, it was beautiful.
I don't know if you can see it with the light.
No, the light is actually kind of blurring.
Okay. Well, the end of this rainbow is a solar field.
Oh, look at that! See,
I didn't even notice it at first.
That's more of that's an omen right there. That's just nature talking to you. That's fabulous.
It was crazy.
When I saw the end of a rainbow, I was like, "Holy cow!" I mean, viscerally, it was a pot of gold because who the hell ever gets to see the end of a rainbow, right? But that's very, very cool. I like that. And I wanted to say something real quick. We were talking about worker co-ops and stuff, and just like the whole how. And I am an absolute huge fan of worker co-ops and unions. But the one thing I'm noticing happening more and more are people getting more into like earth spirituality, earth religions. You see a lot of pagan religions coming up and coming, witchcraft, Wicca, even Buddhism, which is a lot more nature oriented than the three Bible-based religions. You see a lot of that. And so my point is like concerning, I'm not sure that worker co-ops in and of themselves would solve the problem. I think they'd be an amazing tool and medium towards the solution. But I think you have to have some sort of internal character as opposed to an external character. If you have a character that is disposed towards respecting nature, holding it in awe, and humility. And I think that's really what I think it comes down to value and virtue as far per individual, as far as like getting things changed. You have to change the way you think and view the world before the changes are going to actually occur.
Yeah, that's an interesting philosophical discussion. We could have that at our next meeting in more depth.
Absolutely.
I studied some philosophy as an undergraduate, but what I would just say to that, because I'm asked this a lot, like, how do I motivate students to do anything? How do I motivate anybody to do anything? And I don't know. I don't know if I don't have a perfect, formula, but I feel sometimes you just have to start doing things before you really understand why you're doing them. That's
like why I like your suggestion or your advice of like just get out there and start going into nature. Take your hikes, take your walks, go play in the ponds and jump in puddles and go out in a rainstorm. I mean, go embrace nature. That's going to cause the change. When you start to see nature as actually a wonderful, beautiful thing, how much better your life is when you're walking around a peaceful forest preserve instead of when you're driving in gridlock to go to your job and home. That's when you start seeing the difference between what should be and what is.
Well, right. I think it is a matter of doing things, just doing things. And I would say, let's not forget about humans either, right? So engage with other human beings, and particularly human beings that are different from us, because we have a lot to learn from them. Just as an example, like I was working with some kids and I try to get them to drink a kale smoothie. Well, initially they're like, kale smoothie? No way in hell I'm going to drink
Ew.
But a week, 5 days later, after growing some kale, showing them how it was made, adding some honey and banana, they were actually serving the kale smoothie to their parents, who were saying, ew, I don't want to taste it. And they were like, thank you for me. So in a week, you can transform.
Because you feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. And I say that because we have so many older folks, retired folks too, who are, they've lived a long life. They've seen a lot of the nonsense that's occurred. They went from the 60s, which seemed like the time of change, and 50 years later, in many ways, we've gone backwards. And my response to them is get involved, work with young people.
Right.
Don't ignore young people. Derive your enthusiasm and youth from young people, right? Engage, share your knowledge with them. Let's break this intergenerational separation that it's been foisted on us by the media, by just random structures in society.
Right.
And if we can do that, we can become a united humanity again. I really do think we've lost.
I agree. Oh,
whether that's your
absolutely.
grandparents,
Yeah.
your neighboring
We're
kids.
completely
Whatever.
divided. It's ridiculous.
And that reminds me of like having people that are more connected with the earth. I mentioned the ranked choice voting, and the people in Alaska voted to have ranked choice voting statewide. And a major part of that was all of the natives people. They all came together and backed it 100% because they want to be able to vote their heart and vote for people who believe in protecting Mother Earth. And I don't know if that wraps it up for us today, bringing it back to Indigenous Day. But I think it's really beautiful that we're doing all these efforts. And I love that you mentioned to celebrate all the good work that is going on out there. We're not turning the ship around yet, but we are making some progress. There are a lot of people out there fighting really hard, especially our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I love it. I love celebrating that. Thank you so much for bringing up that point.
Well, Kelvin and David, you guys are great. And, I love to spend time with you whenever you want to have a conversation. We could talk philosophically. In the future, we can talk about other areas of the environment that we didn't really get into today. I mean, there's just a lot of potential.
I was wondering why David wasn't talking to end the show. But he always says, thanks for coming to talk with us, Dr. Peter Schwartzman, Mayor of Galesburg, and be good and be green. He does the finger point, be green. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.